Hello and welcome to this Personnel Today webinar in association with Sage People. How is your HR department equipped to handle the workplace of the future? Shifts in the way that organisations operate and how they manage their workforce are putting pressure on HR leaders to adapt. According to research that we're going to learn more about this afternoon, 4 out of 5 senior HR professionals believe their skill set needs to change. How they change and what it means for the HR profession is what we're going to look at today, and I'm joined by 2 seasoned HR directors who are going to help us navigate this topic. Craig McCoy is a serial interim HR director with more than 30 years experience at a broad range of organisations in the private and public sector. He is managing director of Learning Loop and also chair of the London HR Connection, the busy HR networking community in the capital. Our second speaker is Tony Lehner, Vice President of People at Sage, who has a wealth of experience in senior HR roles in technology. Tony joined Sage in 2017 as People Director for Asia Pacific, as well as being the global lead for engagement, diversity and inclusion. He now leads Sage's people team in the UK and Ireland. Okay, Craig and Tony will be presenting for around 30 to 40 minutes, after which we will run a question and answer session, and that will take us to a finish time of just before 3 o'clock. I urge you, the audience, to join in. Use the chat function to send any questions and comments that you want to put to Tony and to Craig at any time, and I will relay these to our speakers during the Q&A at the end. After the webinar, please do leave your feedback, and later today or early tomorrow we'll be sending you a copy of the slides and a link to a recording of the webinar. Okay, let's get started. Please welcome Craig McCoy. Over to you, Craig.
Hello and welcome everybody. And first of all, a bit of introduction about me. So you'll see from the slides, I've actually worked for over 35 years. Sounds a terribly long time. But it does give me a perspective on how HR has changed over that period of time. I've held 15 HR director roles at a number of businesses. You can see the logos on the slide. Some of the better known ones would include B-Sky-B, BT, Aegis Media, Bupa. And as Rob says, I also chair London HR Connection. So very pleased to be with you here today. So moving on to the next slide. First of all, just give you some context around changes in the world of work as I see it. As Rob has said, the Sage people have done a questionnaire of 500 HR leaders, and much of the presentation is based on this webinar. But I'm also going to give you some personal perspectives from my own point of view over the years. But the meat of it is really about the research findings, which is the 5 points listed below. So first of all, HR is refocusing and shifting to become more of a people function. The way HR operates is evolving, the model is changing. The technology used in HR is changing too. There are barriers to change and we need to try to overcome them, and new skill sets are required. And finally, look at how to get ahead. I'm going to cover basically the first 2 points and then hand over to Tony to cover points 3 onwards. So first of all, the context. How is the workforce changing? Well, a number of points here that you can see. The first one is that there is a global skills crisis. The worldwide rate of unemployment is falling to its all-time low, and the latest predictions show it's going to fall below 5%. And most recruiters say that biggest hiring challenge is the lack of qualified candidates to meet their requirements. That's from a Gallup poll that was conducted recently. We're seeing both the emergence of new roles, such as data scientists, coming to the forefront as business requirements change. We also have crises in certain job functions, particularly at the moment. Obviously, hot on the list would be things like nursing and also the impact of Brexit on the high street and other functions. So we continue to have a global skills crisis. The second one is about engagement. And again, according to Gallup, only 21% of employees are fully engaged, which means there's a big headache for industry there to raise level of engagement. And the needs of people to be engaged are also changing. The third one is around the nature of the workforce. So the contingent and the gig economy, the gig workforce is growing. So tenure in permanent roles is getting shorter and shorter. The boundary between permanent and interim roles is getting more and more blurred, despite things like IR35 coming along. Interims are getting younger. What used to be the province of people over 50 is now the province of people, I've seen interims in their 20s these days. Certainly the idea of job for life is dead. HR compliance is becoming more demanding. It's a highly regulated workplace. At the same time, there is a dynamic tension between the need to impose controls and the need to trust and empower individual employees, and I see a real fine balance between the two. And the final one there is technology. People in their home lives as consumers are using their iPhones and apps and Android phones for all kinds of things and expect the same thing from their workforce. So how is that affecting HR? So let's talk about the ways in which HR is changing. Again, in the poll, we talked to, say, 500 HR leaders. 94% of those leaders felt that HR was on a journey to become a people function, and we can talk a bit about what that means. And 47% of the respondents actually thought that change would be very significant. So that sets the backdrop for how HR needs to refocus itself. But what is in a name? Is it, we're all going HR departments, maybe switching to become people departments? Is this just the latest fad? Does the emperor have no clothes? What do you think? At this point, I'm going to hand over to Rob to manage our first poll.
Thank you, Craig. So, yeah, here is the question. What title do you currently use to describe your team or function? And you've got a number of choices there: HR, people, personnel, talent, workforce. If it's another one, then put that in, or if it's not applicable, then do say so if you're calling in from outside HR. Okay, do vote now. I'll be very interested to see what the results are like. Okay, simply click on the buttons next to each option and then hit submit. I can see that most people have now voted. Now this is interesting. Okay, I'll close the poll now. Thank you for voting, and there are the results. So 69% HR, 23% people, 0 on personnel on this Personnel Today webinar. We can talk about that later if you want. And then a few on talent and workforce. Okay, back to you, Craig. Was that roughly what you'd expect?
It is, yes. I think over time we'll see more and more switch away from HR to people, but let's see. It's not going to be an immediate thing. Thank you, Rob. So if I move us on to the next slide. So let's take a bit of a deeper look on how the modern workforce is changing and how HR is therefore responding. There is much more focus these days on the individual employee, moving away from seeing people as a corporate resource to an individual with his or her own thoughts and feelings and ambitions. And I guess that's reflected in part of the reason for changing the title of the function. At the same time, there are increasingly generational differences. We have now up to 5 generations in the workforce any one time. Everything from those in the silent generation, as it's so called, somewhat older employees, through baby boomers like myself, into the alphabet of X, Y, and Z, millennials, and all have different needs and different worldviews. And that needs to affect the way in which HR operates. At the same time, values drivers are becoming more important. So we've seen the rise of sustainability, a growing focus on global warming with organisations like Extinction Rebellion coming to the fore. All major businesses these days have a modern slavery statement. And the focus on values is becoming much more important, I see, in the workplace. The next one is about business ethics and things like diversity and inclusion, pretty much more mainstream than they were. And again, something very much that people look for in the workplace. And tenure is getting shorter and shorter and moving away from the idea of having the job for life. On the next slide, an increasing focus on development and investment in people, the focus on the acquisition of skills, not just linked to current role, but much more longer term, and perhaps not even directly into the world of work. And we're seeing, obviously, the rise of apprenticeships, the apprenticeship levy, through to sponsorship of MBAs, PhDs. People expect much more to have investment these days. Flexibility of working patterns and contracts. The working patterns, much more remote working, part-time, job sharing. And on the contract side, so the gig economy, flexible contracts, despite IR35 perhaps. But we're seeing the need for much more flexibility in terms of both working patterns and contracts, and that affects HR. The old annual cycles are pretty well dead, I would say. So the annual appraisal, the idea that you can have your feedback once a year is not good enough. People want real-time feedback in the moment so that they can respond to it. Similar story on engagement surveys. People want to have regular pulse surveys, not just the annual employment survey. People expect the workplace to become more technical and digital savvy. They have that at home, so why wouldn't they have it at work? And the final one there is candidate experience as consumers. HR working more closely these days with marketing and treating candidates as prospects. That mentality is really having a deep effect on the whole recruitment process. But at the same time, the way HR operates is also evolving to reflect those changes in the workplace. First of all, looking at talent acquisition, the notion these days of pre-onboarding, before people even hit the ground running, and the first 90 days, looking at talent acquisition as an end-to-end process, so looking at candidates as prospects, working closely with marketing, enhancing the experience as part of that, and increasingly adopting artificial intelligence to optimize the recruitment process, we're balancing that with the need to treat people as individuals. So these are major influences on the recruitment talent acquisition process. Workforce experience, there's a very significant shift towards pulse surveys, moving away from the annual once per year engagement survey, and using surveys to enhance the employee experience and not just be about engagement, and to also design and adopt new ways of working, providing input to how organizations organize themselves in areas like agile working, for example. On performance management, it's much more these days about continuous feedback, real-time feedback in the moment, and transparency of goals, the alignment of goals for the organization, and holistic rewards management. That's more of a balanced scorecard approach, which doesn't just base performance management and reward on financial success. Then learning development, having flexible career paths, no longer the same linear paths that were historically in place. Very much being driven by the employee based on their own needs and preferences. And a culture of informal micro-learning where people are constantly learning from day to day rather than necessarily in lengthy structured processes. So the expectations that employees have are changing significantly. At the same time, there's a real shift towards using data more meaningfully, and these are the results of the survey again. So, for example, looking at the single system of record, 33% of respondents said that we already have that, 48% are adopting it. So having integrated systems, a coherent architecture for HR systems, integrating things like recruitment, learning management, performance, reward and benefits, even time and attendance. Having a single system of record is definitely the trend. But at the same time, HR are moving away from the whole gut feel culture HR has historically been accused of being focused on the fluffy people stuff, not on hard numbers, even being enumerates. The expectations are definitely changing, and people's decisions are being much more informed by data. At the same time, that data is becoming more accessible. So 38% respondents said it is already accessible, 51% are adopting that. So touch of a button, real time, capable of being reported on dashboards, which can be distributed and interrogated by line managers as well as HR. All of this is an increasing trend. So just to pull all this together, these are the main shifts that I'm seeing in organisations. Definitely a move away from the kind of static, steady-state organisation to much more agile. So lots of constant restructuring, reshaping, changing operating models, looking at different ways of retaining core capability, but perhaps outsourcing and offshoring non-core activity. HR operations continue to automate and to use augmented intelligence and using things like machine learning, not just in recruitment, which has been an early adopter perhaps of AI, but also in other functions. The bots are here to take over HR transactions. We've mentioned gut feel and spreadsheets, moving much more to data and people science, which is definitely an emerging trend. Local payroll migrating to multi-country payroll, international organisations, obviously getting economy of scale and integrated systems. Applicant tracking systems are becoming more marketing focused, becoming much more the people marketing engine, enhancing the candidate experience. HR apps becoming people apps. Annual appraisals becoming continuous performance management. Employee satisfaction becoming workplace experience management, looking at things like net promoter scores, for example, and looking at the whole employee experience. Company training, company-led training, becoming much more autonomous and gearing more towards social learning. Absence management, typically a problem-centered, reactive, and somewhat punitive process, but much more enlightened, proactive, preventative, looking at health, wellness, and well-being. And finally, the HR executive, the HR team being renamed as the people function or the chief people officer. So those are the main areas that I'm seeing changing. At this point, I'm going to hand back to Rob.
Many thanks, Craig. Very interesting stuff. We're going to hear from Tony any moment. I'm just going to remind our listeners that they can make comments at any time. Is some of the things that Craig has been saying, do they ring true to you? So please make comments and we can add those into the discussion later on. Okay, over to you now, Tony. Welcome.
Hey Rob, thanks, and thanks Craig. That was it was extremely interesting, and actually, as I've been doing some preparation for this, I think it's made me feel very old when I've looked at the journey that I've personally been on within an HR or people function. So what I'll do is I'll just start by giving a bit of an introduction about myself. So I have worked in technology organisations for more than 30 years, but I absolutely know nothing about technology. I've worked 23 years in HR and about 8 years in finance prior to escaping and joining HR, which is a lot more fun, just quietly. During that 23 years, I've worked across Asia Pacific, the US, and now a bit more than a year ago, I moved to the UK to lead the UK and Ireland people team for Sage. We have 2,800 colleagues in the UK and Ireland. I'm based in Newcastle upon Tyne, and that's where Sage was founded almost 40 years ago. So, as you know, we're talking today about the many changes in HR and what that means for us as HR professionals and how we can get ahead of the change. But before that, can I just give a little bit more context about why this is interesting for Sage? So as I said, Sage is, well, I think I said, has been around for almost 40 years. Our 40-year anniversary is next year. We're a FTSE 100 company, and our products include software for HR, payroll and accounting. And because of the HR and payroll, we're very interested in the trends in the HR profession. We need to find out as much as we can about the changes and future needs of our customers, so that we ensure that our products are delivering what our customers need. So our interest is in what is changing, and also what mid-market organisations feel are driving the change. Also, how quickly organisations are able to respond to these changes. So, as I said before, I've seen so much change in my 23 years, I guess, of working in HR, but even working in finance before that. It's incredible the way that things have moved, and I generally believe in a very positive way. So I'll touch on that as I continue through this presentation. Also, just so you know, the Sage gets a lot of its information from analysts or customers or industry experts. But for this, and I know that Craig mentioned this, we have spoken to 500 HR leaders across the UK, the US, Canada, Australia and Germany. And we were asking about a few areas of change within HR. I can't cover everything, but I'll talk through what I think are probably the most important, such as the evolving HR technology, barriers to change, future changes to our skill sets and what that means for our teams and for us in the future. And also, lastly, the things that we should consider to get ahead of future changes and what it means for yourself, your teams and your organisation to be successful in the future. So, I'll just see if I can do that. Firstly, we were looking at how technology is used in HR and how that's changing. We want to know how HR uses technology today and what the focus is on our customers in the mid-market. So the key findings are, I found this, I think, to be a little bit interesting. It wasn't a massive shock, but 43% of the 500 use cloud or mobile apps or see it as a clear priority for HR in the mid-market. 43% have used cloud technology, but only 36% have adopted mobile technology. So, as I said, I don't think that that's a big surprise, and probably because I work for a tech company, it seems to be quite normal for me, especially to be able to, look at HR data anywhere on my phone. I absolutely feel sure that that's going to increase over time. So that one probably didn't surprise me greatly. However, after the cloud and mobile, the areas of, I should be looking at the HR technology adoption rates. So, 43% was cloud, 36% mobile, then getting down to areas around about 25%, which was record keeping, people analytics, and self-service. The one that really stood out for me there was self-service. Probably because I think that self-service is absolutely the low-hanging fruit that we have as a people function or an HR team, where we can be way more efficient in the way that we operate. I don't know if all of you have audit teams that you have to work with in your organisations, but our risk people, our audit people sat down with me last week, and they wanted to know all the areas that my team do data entry. And I looked at them seriously saying, but we don't do it. We don't do data entry. And for them, it was like a surprise. They expected that I had a team of people putting in annual leave or, pay rises and all this sort of stuff. I couldn't think of any data entry points except for when we hire. So my talent acquisition team, they do data entry at that point. And then after that, it becomes pretty much self-serve the whole way. Now, the benefit of that is that it allows me to have a team that are focusing on much more, I guess, higher value stuff for the business. So that when I say high value, I guess we're looking at insights around our workforce, or how do we make Sage a more amazing place to work, and things like the employer branding or EVP. Also, I absolutely feel that as an HR professional, I don't want to be doing data entry, and I'm pretty sure my team don't want to be doing data entry. So apart from it being efficient, I think it's a much more enjoyable job. So back to the graph, I guess the other things for the future are artificial intelligence, gamification, virtual reality, and what's that? Intelligence augmentation. So I know that we do some of this stuff, but as you can tell, I'm probably stumbling over this a little bit because it's beyond my technical ability, but I know that we use AI to try and predict where we're going to have attrition. And that can be tied to the number of questions that we're getting from a colleague around, to our hub, or it could be the number of questions that we get to our employee relations team, or it could be various other things that we're looking for trends. So we use AI to help predict attrition. But we also use bots, so we use it for our performance development process, which we call LEAD. And now that is a quarterly ongoing feedback process. It's not one of those annual type of feedbacks. But also we use bots for our learning and development. So just got to push the right button. All right, so now 43% of leaders think that their organisations won't keep up. So that means that we need to adopt to new technology, or we know that we need to adopt to new technology, but we're coming up against barriers. The research suggests that the challenges that we have are resource restrictions, so probably cash. Maybe we can't build a compelling case for change, or there are too many other priorities, or there could even be a lack of vision at the top of the organisation. Now, certainly 1 to 3 sound very reasonable to me, and probably things that I've had to deal with over the years. Sorry, keep pushing the wrong button. That could be the wrong button again. Sorry. So this one about resource restrictions. So 57% said that they can't invest due to resource restrictions. I guess that ties very well to point number 2 about making a case for, or a business case for change. But it ties back to that people in HR have felt that they don't have maybe the experience to build the case for change. One of the things that I've come across over time is that some of the things that where we in HR can see that there will be a genuine benefit to the business, such as improved in employee satisfaction, retention, or time to fill, it's hard to put a dollar value on that. So that can often make it hard to build a case. 53% said there's too much competing priorities. Well, I absolutely see that, because we have to keep looking at the number of programs that we're trying to implement and there's so many different things that we need to do, but it's about prioritising. The last one about lack of vision and leadership, that probably worried me because I would have hoped that the CPO was part of the C-suite in making these types of decisions. Oops, I think that was the wrong button again. You can see that I'm not very technical. Okay, so I also found this really interesting. So the 86% of respondents believe that HR skill sets need to change. When I say I find it interesting, I have absolutely no doubt that it's true. One of the things that I found really interesting recently was how I needed to hire data analysts within the people function. And then when we've hired the data analysts, we've had to hire more data analysts because there is so much value that we can get out of all the different measures, and we can measure into quite a lot of detail very easily. So I'm sure that that's true, that our skill sets will need to change into the future, and it's probably not a surprise. All right, so now about the skills gap. So on the left, we have the skills gap today, and then on the right, we have the skills gap rated in importance in 3 years' time. So I guess that means that today we're saying tech savvy is important, creativity, people analytics, and behavioural sciences are where the skill gaps are today. In the future, the skills rated are communications, people analytics, creativity, and that one about tech savvy. So 73% said digital skill sets will be important. 76% said HR leaders think that people analytics will be important in the future. 78% of HR leaders think this will be communications will be vital in the future. So I'm going to hand over to Rob to do the second poll.
Okay, thank you. So the question in this poll is, what's your biggest HR skills gaps today? And unlike the last poll, this time you can choose as many as you like, but just choose the ones that you feel are most significant. So what are your biggest HR skills gaps today? People analytics, communications, tech savviness, creativity, and behavioural sciences. Please do vote. I can see that most of you are doing that now. Meanwhile, if you want to ask any questions at the end or make any comments as we're going along, we're getting quite a lot through, so if you want to be heard, please do submit your questions as we're going along. Okay, I can see that most people have voted now. In answer to Aviva's question around can you expand a little on behavioural science, I would imagine that's around psychometrics, those types of things, and understanding what drives people to behave in certain ways. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. Let's have a look at what the outcome is. Okay, so clearly people analytics and tech savviness are the two that sort of stand out there. And communications is probably the one that's furthest back, and that was the one, Tony, that you were saying was perhaps one of the biggest ones in 3 years' time. Back to you, Tony. Is that roughly what you expected?
Well, thank God it is, yes. I guess, if you think about it, the chances are that we work in HR, we work in a people function, probably because we're probably not technical thinking. I really struggle with technology, but it is great that I've always worked in technology because I've had people around me who know what they're talking about and are as passionate about technology as I am about human resources. So it's good to be part of a team. It does scare me sometimes, my lack of skills in around technology and analytics, but it is good to have a team. So that really, for me, was the importance of hiring the right people into our people team that are able to actually do that sort of data mining and get the do the analysis that gives us the information that we can then share with the business. Look, we have seen a lot of great improvement within Sage in say, the last 18 months. I'll give you an example. Our attrition has reduced by 40% in 12 months. I'm not saying that it's purely because of data, right? But certainly having data and being able to find where and being able to predict where issues are and then address them has been, has helped greatly in addressing that. And sorry, when I say within Sage, I mean UK and Ireland. And then, I guess I've talked about those. I guess communications is interesting because I think we said that in 3 years' time it would be more important. I think communications is incredibly important. And again, from a Sage point of view, it is one of the areas that we have the most concern in our engagement surveys is the amount of communication and how good we are at communicating. So I will now just move to how do we get ahead. So I guess it's that thing of using the same analogy again, but finding the low-hanging fruit and implementing change quickly. So the thing that we have really focused on is our colleague engagement survey that we do every 6 months. But the important thing, and look, I'm sure everyone knows this on this call, but it's getting the feedback, then acting on it. And that's what we have absolutely done with a passion, is looking at what were the issues and then addressing those. And that really was through our process of running the pulse, what we call our pulse surveys, but also getting the feedback, analysing and taking it seriously. The next being agile, so finding new and better ways to improve the employee experience, and that employee experience really starts from the interview process to right through the whole journey of life within an organisation. I think that the comments before about talent and global unemployment reducing and I guess the war for talent, I absolutely find it up here in Newcastle all the time that we typically have many open roles purely because there is a shortage of talent. So then getting ahead of skills, so with your current teams, but also with your future teams. So there's that thing of our teams that we have today need to keep working to grow their current skill sets to be worthwhile in the marketplace into the future. But I think it's also about making sure that we attract the right talent for the needs that we have. And that example that I gave about the data analysts within my team is a good example. So getting ahead with technology. So we know that it's rapidly changing all the time, and we do need to become a lot more tech savvy. I think it's a fact. And then making the business case for change. So investing in our people is one of the most important business decisions, as it says, but we need to present business cases with confidence, and we need to be able to show the true business benefit to our business leaders. And honestly, I know that I've been through this many times, and I've seen real benefit from making investments in areas such as technology or running colleague surveys, all that sort of, doing the data analytics, etc. So we've talked about the changing face of HR. To get a copy of the research report, you can download that. I must admit I don't know how, but I'm not sure, Rob, if you know exactly how we're making the report available.
We'll send a link out by email to everyone who's attended today. Okay,
cool. So that was really everything from the 5 areas that we wanted to focus on today, and now I think we're at the open for questions, the Q&A.
We are indeed. Many thanks, Tony. Some really interesting points there, and we've got plenty of questions to get through. We're bang on time as well, so let's turn to those questions. Just Straight away, in terms of what you were just talking about, the business case, we've had a couple of questions, one from Margaret, one from Garang. Can you expand on making the business case? How do you put a financial amount on the proposed initiatives? Tony, any advice around that? And on to you, Craig, afterwards as well. I mean, this is a big thing that HR has to do
Sure.
quite often.
So I think there's one thing that I've been, I guess, blessed about is that my first few years of work were in finance. So I'm relatively good with numbers. But something that comes to mind is, I think, I mentioned how we've had a 40% reduction in our attrition rate in the last 12 months. We had to make some big calls as to how will we slow down our attrition. And it wasn't horrendous. It was less than 20%. But still 20% attrition when you're in the northeast of England, where skilled talent isn't, well, unemployment is low. That's too high a level of attrition. So we made specific investments in parts of the for our people, based on feedback that we from data mining, but also or data analytics, but also feedback from our engagement surveys. And the whole premise was, if we spend this money, we will reduce attrition. So as I said, now attrition is 40% less for the UK and Ireland. The important thing there is that we have skilled people working here. We have people, they're probably working, they're not leaving because they're more engaged, then they're happier, and then things like our customer sat scores are also improving, and therefore we end up with much better business results. So the link was, if we can reduce attrition, there will be benefits. And we built that into the business case, and it all seriously came true. But it was there was always this, I guess, a leap of faith from leadership of, will it really equate to improved customer sat, or if we make these investments, will attrition reduce? And it did work out. So I guess there's that thing of sharing the facts as you see it, but also sometimes you may have to trust the data, trust your instincts as well. But that's probably the best example I can give. Craig, did you want to share anything?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. So I think in part it's about the language that HR people use, not being directly attuned to the business, and not really focusing on the key business metrics that are important. So I think we all probably realise that people costs are often the largest cost that any business has. And as you say, Tony, if people see the attrition rate going down, for example, well, that has a direct bottom line benefit. And it's looking at those things which are really visible in terms of shifting the dial. I've just spent 2 years in the elderly care sector, for example, where there's a regulatory requirement of certain staffing levels. So whenever you have turnover, early turnover, hard to fill jobs, gaps that need to be resourced, that translates directly into cost, and that therefore impacts your profitability as an organisation. So that's a very good metric to hone in on. The other example would be where your inability to fill jobs is actually inhibiting your rate of growth. So again, with the care example, businesses can open new care homes if they can provide the staffing and the qualified staffing like nursing. Nursing, as you know, is a massive skill shortage in the UK and globally, made much worse by Brexit. Therefore, it is directly rate limiting the ability to which you can actually grow your business. So this is the sort of language that needs to be used. A lot of HR people, unfortunately, do not use the language. They stop at the simply measuring activity without translating it into financials.
Janet makes a good point earlier on would be interested in hearing thoughts on HR. Oh no, sorry, I've got the wrong. Janet's done two questions. Sorry, okay, Janet. The first question from Janet. I also think that the roles of the staff in the HR function are changing. Certainly at a senior level, there's a greater expectation that you are financially savvy, and indeed many people at the top are ideally suited to move into operational roles. Would you agree with that, Craig?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to be able to understand the rudiments of a P&L or balance sheet. You have to be able to have numbers at your fingertips. Obviously helps if you've got good data and good systems to interrogate and to put your arguments using real data rather than gut feel. But yeah, certainly financial language and therefore financial training, which often HR people just don't have. They don't really understand the fundamentals of financial control, financial management, how to read a balance sheet. These are all becoming essentials rather than nice to have.
Perfect. Okay, good. We're going to move on to a question from Mary now. She's asked some questions about small and medium-sized businesses. She's particularly interested in your thoughts on senior leadership team behaviours in SME organisations. And I think there was one other. Yeah, there's a question from Dawn as well. I think this was while you were talking about some of those changes. I think it was in your final slide, Craig. From my experience, all of the points raised are being adopted in larger organisations, but much less so in the SME arena. Why does the panel think this is the case? Craig, you've worked in a range of organisations.
Yeah, so a couple of points there. I mean, I think often I've worked in quite a few mid-sized corporates and some smaller organisations. Often they're inhibited by the degree to which they can invest. So they tend not to be early adopters of, for example, new technology deployment. So I think it is partly about resources and availability of resources. Obviously, there are exceptions to that, particularly, perhaps in the tech sector where they're perhaps more readily willing to invest in technology. But I think a lot of the points we've made on this webinar have been more cultural, and I think those things are directly applicable to SMEs as well as large corporates. I think the other point to make is that the HR skill set is obviously very transferable across organisations of different sizes. So I think in most senses the content is applicable. I accept that in certain cases it's about the lack of investment resource and budget to be able to invest in some of these things.
Okay, thank you. So to move on to what's in a name. So Tony, I see that Sage, you call your division around sort of HR technology, Sage People, and we had the poll earlier. Bill has made the point, how do customers and stakeholders know that HR is changing to people? I'm concerned they will see it as a fad. Tony, any comments on when we talk about HR and people? Clearly no one wants to call it personnel anymore.
Sorry. Look, I must correct myself 5 times a day when I say something about the HR team, and I go, I mean people. And I struggle with, probably because I worked in human resources for so long, and then getting used to the people, I guess, name for my team. I still struggle on, but that could be because I'm just old or something like that. But from within the business, I guess the important thing is we changed. I don't know when we actually changed within Sage, but we've stuck with people. It is certainly where the way that, well, I think we saw that it's the way that a lot of the market is moving. Personally, I actually prefer that. I think people sounds more appropriate. But it's a good question about will it be a fad, and maybe it'll. But I've seen it called human capital. I've seen it called various things across different businesses. Some of those didn't last. It seems that people will. So I don't know that I'm necessarily answering your question, but I certainly still struggle with with remembering to call my team the people team.
Craig, any comment on that?
I think the important thing is you have to have a real commitment to change the nature of the proposition of what you can offer to the organisation at the same time as changing the title. Otherwise, the title change in itself just becomes very hollow. People are quite cynical about it. Say, okay, you're moving from human remains, the people function. What's different? Does the emperor have any clothes at all? So I think it's really, if you are contemplating a change of title, I would seriously suggest there's some real meat to changes that can back it up at the same time. But often I think it is just a title change.
One thing that we have absolutely done is make sure that people is one of our core 3 strategies. Because at the end of the day, we are a people business. So when we're talking strategy to our people, it's one of the first things we talk about is all the things that we're doing to show how important people are, how important engagement is, how important skills and learning and development opportunities are, and career paths, all of that sort of stuff. So we're certainly not, I think that we've done a good job in making that part of our change and explaining that to our colleagues.
Okay,
just to build on that, I think it's really important that the CEO and the leadership team embrace the change as well. Otherwise, it's just seen as HR teams just changing their name for the sake of it because it's trendy. So I think it has to be evidenced by senior leadership behaviour.
Okay, thank you both. I've got a question from Marnie, which relates to the skills gaps that we were addressing. What do the panel believe HR can do to address these skills gaps? Craig, over to you first on that one.
Yeah, well, I think I suppose the first decision is make or buy. So you can obviously invest in developing the current people you've got, or else you can bring in people externally who have the right skills and orientation to be successful, or maybe a mixture of the two. I think bringing people in, particularly for other functions, not necessarily people who've been in HR all their life, but who've worked, for example, in marketing or IT, or other areas of the business where they can actually bring a richness of skills and experience, which helps the HR proposition enormously. So I think it is about looking at the composition of the team and bringing in skills either internally or externally to supplement that skill base. And then obviously there's a huge part to play through development. So whether that's formal structured development, training, whether that's short, medium or long, and also I think around things like job rotation, using projects creatively to give people the opportunity to develop new skills. I think it's a mixture of all those things. I don't think it's just one solution.
Tony, anything to add on?
Just one thing that I'd add, obviously, I think, Craig, everything you just said then was perfect. Just something interesting that I found out about this week, that we were looking to hire a data analyst within our marketing team, and that person didn't accept our offer. This is a grad, and they accepted an offer of £130,000 somewhere else. So I think we're looking at supply and demand, and there is massive supply for the skills, there's massive demand for the skills and not a big supply at the moment. So I think the idea of trying to, acquire or grow, I think there's going to have to be a lot of growing, definitely the demand for that type of skill is huge.
Yeah, great.
Okay, thank you. A question from Quentin. He was asking what the implications of these changes are for independent practitioners, interims, I guess, like yourself. How do we avoid being left behind? Craig, as someone who's acted as an interim in many organisations, is there any advice on how you avoid being left behind?
Well, yeah, obviously I've got my own personal perspective on this, being very much in the interim mode. But I think say tenure is getting shorter and shorter on the permanent market. I think despite some of the government moves in areas like IR35, there is a buoyant interim market in the UK. I think the skill sets that can be brought by interims are significant. You tend to overhire for the opportunity. You tend to work for a defined period of time. But a lot of interim roles are about skills transfer. So I think hopefully I've left a legacy of developing the skill set of the HR teams in the organisation, which I've supported over the years. So I think it is important to keep yourself current, and in many ways it's easier if you are an interim because you're always looking for the next opportunity. You're always marketing yourself, and I'll try to encourage people who are perhaps longer within organisations to have a similar mindset, to always view yourself as being a marketer, a self-marketer, looking to acquire skills, and they seem to be generationally a much more prevalent attitude these days, with younger people seeing their career horizons within organisations as being shorter, seeing the need to acquire skills and invest in themselves. So I think there has been a generational shift, but it is something that's applicable to anyone, whether they're permanent, interim, consultant. I think everyone needs to think along those lines.
Okay. Many thanks. I'm afraid that is all we have time for. Thanks to everybody who's submitted questions, and apologies to those people who we didn't have time to get to your comments. We at Personnel Today have got webinars coming up over the next few weeks. We've got one on HR for SMEs. We've got another on mental health in the workplace, and we'll be launching one soon on financial well-being. So visit personneltoday.com/webinars to see what's coming up. That just leaves me to thank our speakers for their time and expertise and some really interesting points in the presentation today. Craig and Tony, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
You've been listening to a Personnel Today webinar in association with Sage People. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.